He can see everything in history. He can see the beginning and the middle and the end all at the same time. It doesn't bother him because he has a different perspective. Now, because God knows everything will happen and is not limited by time, we know these verses. Hebrews 11:13. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. He can see it all. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before his eyes. So there are no secrets with God. I wonder what secret you foolishly think you're hiding from God. You don't have any secrets from God. God knows every good, every bad, every ugly part of your life, still loves you unconditionally. But you don't have any secrets from God. He knows every thought you're going to have. You haven't even had those thoughts yet, but he knows what you're going to think because he knows everything that will happen. Psalm 139 verse 16 says this: the days allotted to me, in other words, my lifespan, the days allotted to me had all been recorded in your book before, circle before, any of them ever began. God already knows what's going to happen on every day of your life before you even took your first breath. When you were in your mother's womb, God says, I already knew every detail of every second of every moment of your life. God's plan for your life doesn't start the moment you take your first breath. Your life began when God thought you up. And when he thought you up, before you ever took your first breath, every day of your life was planned before you were born. And so if you don't end up not being born, then God's plan just got aborted. That's why it's wrong. Now, here's the second thing that we know. Second fact about the future. God's plan for my future is good. God's plan for my future is good. It's not a bad plan. In fact, God has no bad plans for people. God is a good God. And because God is a good God, all of his plans are good. He doesn't have any bad plans for you. All of his plans for you are good. You're the pastor. God already knows what's going to happen on every day of your life before you even took your first breath. When you were in your mother's womb, God says, I already knew every detail of every second of every moment of your life. God's plan for your life doesn't start the moment you take your first breath. Your life began when God thought you up. And when he thought you up, before you ever took your first breath, every day of your life was planned before you were born. And so if you don't end up not being born, then God's plan just got aborted. That's why it's wrong. Now, here's the second thing that we know. Second fact about the future. God's plan for my future is good. God's plan for my future is good. It's not a bad plan. In fact, God has no bad plans for people. God is a good God. And because God is a good God, all of his plans are good. He doesn't have any bad plans for you. All of his plans for you are good. One of the most famous verses in the Bible, we've read it hundreds of times here at Saddleback, is Jeremiah 29:11. Let's read it aloud together, okay? Read it with me. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Now, I want you to circle some words in this verse. Circle the word know. God says, I know. I already know everything about you. And then he says, I know the plans. Circle the word plans. God has long-range plans for your life. He has a purpose for your life. He has a plan for your life. I know the plans, and then circle the word future. God says, I know the plans I have for your future. Now, what does this promise tell us? That's a promise of God right there. Plans to prosper you, plans not harm you, to give you a hope and a future. What this tells us is that God has thought more about your future than you have. You may have not even given much thought to your future. Some people have no plans for their future. They're just letting life happen to them. They don't have any plans. They don't have any goals. It's just like, well, I kind of like to do this, but they're just kind of skating through life, kind of coasting through life. God has thought far more about your life than you ever have. He's thought about every detail, every thought, every part of it, and he has a plan for your life, and his plan is good for you. Plan to prosper you, plan to give you hope, a future. You say, well, can I miss God's plan? Well, of course you can. In fact, most people do. They miss God's plan because they choose their own plan. You have to choose God's plan for your life. It's not automatic. You see, one of the greatest gifts, but it's also a hindrance to us, is the freedom to choose. God didn't want to create a bunch of puppets. He could have made us where we don't have any choice. You couldn't choose to do bad. You couldn't choose to do other things. But he made us in his image, which means he gave us free will. And every day you make choices. The problem is we often make bad choices. And God doesn't force you to do his plan and purpose. He created you. What God wanted is he didn't want puppets. He wanted children who choose to love him. And you can't say it's real love unless you have the choice to not love. So God says, hey, you can choose to love me or you can choose to not love me. You can choose my plan for your life or you can choose your own plan for your life. You can choose to obey me and trust me or you can choose to not obey me and trust me. He wants you to make the choice. Unfortunately, most people in the world make the wrong choice. And they say, you know what? I'm going to do what I want to do. And that causes all the problems. And so most people die without ever knowing the purpose of their life and without ever fulfilling the plan that God created it for because they didn't choose it. They miss it. You say, well, how in the world would anybody miss God's plan, God's purpose for that? One way, one word, pride. Pride keeps you from fulfilling the purpose that God made you for. Because pride shows up like this. I know God has a plan for my life, but I think I know better than God, and I think I know what will make me happy more than God, so I'm going to disobey what he says to do, and I'm going to do what I want to do. That's called pride. It's pretty arrogant to think, I know better than God does. I know God says this about sex, but I'm going to do it my way. And I know God says this about money, but I'm going to do it my way. And I know God says this about my future and my goals, and I know God says, to forgive people instead of be resentful and retaliate, but I'm going to do it my way. That's called arrogance. It's called ego. It's called pride. There's only one thing that causes you to miss the purpose you were created for. Your own ego. Your own pride. You think you know better than God. And this causes so much problem. And instead of the plans to prosper and the plans to have hope and plans that are good plans for the future, you end up with a mess in your life. Now, let me just encourage you. You can't miss God's purpose for your life if you really want it. If you say, God, I'm willing to do whatever you say to do. I'm willing to trust you. I don't understand it all. Some of the stuff you may tell me to do may not make sense. It may be politically incorrect. It may be unpopular. It may be counterculture. But I'm still going to do it because I want your plan instead of mine. If you do that, you can't miss God's purpose for your life. Now, to fulfill my created purpose, here's the third thing. I must choose to trust and obey God. God knows everything that's going to happen in my life, and he has a good plan for my life, but I have to choose that plan. I have to choose to trust God, and I have to choose to obey God. And every single day of my life, God's given me a free choice. And every day, every moment, I'm going to go with God's plan, or I'm going to go with my plan. I'm going to choose what God tells me to do, or I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to do what the Bible says, or I'm going to do what I think is the right thing to do, or is the most convenient thing. Every day we're making this choice. Here's what the Bible says. God says this in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19. God says, today I'm giving you the choice. And it's your choice. He's not going to force you. God's a gentleman. I'm going to give you the choice between life and death. You want to really live, or you want to have a dead-end life? It's up to you. I'm giving you a choice between real living or a dying life, between blessings or curses. You want a blessed life? Well, do what I tell you to do. You want a cursed life that's cursed with all kinds of problems? Well, just do your thing. I'm giving you this choice. And then he says, I call on heaven and earth to witness. He goes, I want all of creation to witness the decision you make, the choice you make. I'm giving you the choice on what you're going to do with your life. You're going to go my way or the highway. You're going to go God's plan, or you're going to go your own plan. And he said, I want everybody in creation to witness this, the choice that you're going to make. And then you can hear the love in his heart when he says, so, come on, choose life. I mean, why would anybody choose a dead end? Why would anybody choose destruction, death, and to be separated from the God who made you and loves you and created you? Why would anybody do that? He says, choose life. Then you and your children will live. He's saying that the choices you make in your life actually affect the next generation too. And the blessing that I put on your life can actually be blessing your next generation in your life if you choose life. But it's up to you. I'm not going to force you to do the right thing because I want you to love me out of free will. Now, here's the fourth fact, and then we can start looking at the promises. God will be with me every step of the way. In my future, I don't know what it's going to be like, and I know I can't control it, but I do know this. God will be with me every step of the way. How do I know that? Because in the Bible, one of the most repeated promises of God is this: you're not going to be alone. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will never abandon you. I'm going to be with you. My presence will be with you. He says it hundreds of times. I'm going to be with you because God made you to be connected to him. Now, you may not always feel God's presence, but God is not a feeling. So something doesn't have to be felt for it to be real. Right now, through this airspace, there are radio waves going through it. There are TV waves going through it. There are internet waves going through it. They're going through my body and yours right now. I don't feel them, but they're real. And if I have a receiver and I can tune in, I can see the color picture that's going through me right now. You don't have to feel something for it to be real. There are a lot of things that are real that you can't see. You can't see protons and electrons. You can't see atoms, but they're real. Everything's made up of atoms. And so I may not feel God, I may not sense God, but he is always with me. Now, that's an encouragement because although I don't know what the future holds, I do know I'm not going to face it alone. And God says this in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5 and 6. Keep your lives free from the love of money. In other words, don't be greedy. And be content with what you have. Because God has said, never will I leave you and never will I forsake you. Now, I looked up this Greek word in the Bible, never, and it means never. It means no way, Jose, never, 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 not in 1,000 years. There's no way. You're never going to be without me. I will. Other people may abandon you. God says, I won't. Other people may betray you. I won't. Other people may discriminate against you. I won't. Other people may walk out of your life. God says, I'm not. Never, 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 never will I leave you. Now, why does he tie that to don't worry about money and be content? Well, he says, if I'm here, what are you worried about? Don't you think I'm going to take care of your needs if I'm with you? One of the things I learned growing up is always go to lunch with Dad because he always picked up the tab. I never had to pay if Dad was with me. So I wanted to make sure I always had lunch with Dad or dinner with Dad. And your heavenly Father says, hey, if I'm with you, what are you worried about? You're worried about bills? Don't you think I'm going to help you through this? Don't worry. And he says, I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. So we can say with confidence. A lot of people are scared about the future. He says, we can say with Christians can be the most confident people when it comes to the future. Why? Because the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. Because what can people do to me? 1 plus God equals a majority. And if God likes me and I like me, you don't like me, what's your problem? God says, I'll be with you and I love you. So no matter what happens in your future, you're not going to go through it alone. Now, this comforting truth that I just shared with you is called the faithfulness of God. That God is not only a good God, he is a faithful God. That means he keeps his word and he always does what's good in your life. And it's part of his character. He keeps every promise. Now, I want you to write this down. Just find a spot where you can write this down in your outline. If you're struggling with anxiety or worry in your life, write this down. Every fear is a misunderstanding of who God is and what he's promised. Every fear is a misunderstanding of who God is and what he's promised. If you knew what God is really like and you knew what he's really promised, you wouldn't be afraid. You wouldn't be anxious about the future. You wouldn't be worried or nervous about what's going to happen tomorrow, because if you really knew who God is and what he's promised to do in your life, you wouldn't be afraid. The next 6 promises we are going to look at are going to dramatically lower your fear factor. I'd like to know what God told me to do when my prayer life got stuck in a rut. It was a time when I just felt like I was praying the same thing over and over and over. In fact, I was beginning to wonder if God was even answering my prayers or even listening. Maybe you felt that way sometimes, or maybe you feel that way right now. So what did God tell me to do? Well, here's what he told me. It was such a powerful way to re-energize my prayer life, and it was so simple that I want to pass it on to you. God told me to do this. He said, Rick, start writing down what you're saying to me, and then I want you to write down what I say to you. Write down what you say to me, and then write down what I say to you. You see, it's really not that complicated. God just said I should start by writing down what I'm feeling, and then I should write down what he tells me after I've read his word. It's really just a form of journaling. And spiritual journaling is a spiritual habit that will help your prayers stay fresh and effective. If you've never tried it, I'm begging you, try this for a week or 2 and see if it doesn't reinvigorate your prayer life. Journaling has many, many benefits to your spiritual life. It'll help you stay consistent in your prayers. It'll give you a permanent reminder of how God answers your prayers because you've written them down. It shows how God is working in your life. You can go back and review it. It'll even help you worship God more and more as you speak to him. God speaks to people who care enough to write it down. So write down what God tells you, but you've got to have a place to do that. Now, I want to encourage you, and I want to help you take this simple step of learning this new spiritual habit in your prayers, of writing down your prayers and writing down your prayer requests. So what I did is I had my Daily Hope team create a brand new spiritual prayer journal. It's got a real simple to follow format that'll help you put into practice God's wisdom that is found in Philippians 4:6. That says this: don't worry about anything, instead pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Those 4 things are part of the format of our prayer journal for this year. It's really cool. You're going to love this tool.
Call 800-600-5004 to support Daily Hope, and we'll send